All right, everyone. I've just started the recording, and my name is Jennifer Wetham. I am a program administrator at the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges here in Washington State, and I am honored to welcome you today to Teaching Research and Writing During the Pandemic. I am very excited about today's webinar. We have Dr. Sharon Michler. She is a professor of English and Humanities from Centralia College. Julie Nurse, library director at Centralia College. And Victor Kakar. And actually, Victor, could you take the mic really quickly and just tell me how to pronounce your last name? I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly.
Car is fine.
Thank you. Yes, perfect. And you are the co-founder and CEO of Scribble, which is a technology we're going to be talking about today. And before we get officially started, I did want to say that right when the pandemic was first beginning, we were at, a lot of you were at the League for Innovations. It was in Seattle this year. And I was doing a presentation with some leaders here in Washington State on undergraduate research, specifically on cures for undergraduate research. And Victor came to the session and talked about how a tool that he has been working on collaboratively for many years that really helps embed undergraduate research and solves a lot of the teaching and learning problems, or addresses those common problems of practice when it comes to the infinitely complex work of teaching writing and teaching research. And when I say teaching, what I think I really mean is learning, helping students learn how to research and helping students learn writing process. And so it was a beautiful, we had a great conversation with the participants and the facilitators, and then we all went downstairs and had a little happy hour, and I found out that a faculty member whom I really respect, Sharon Michler, had been shown this tool and really found a lot that was worthwhile about it. And for me, if a faculty member whom I've known for many, many years, who I know is a fantastic educator, who I know is really committed to helping students learn how to become better writers, helping students learn how to really research, then I want to pay attention and I want to take it very seriously. And Julie Nurse as well. These are two practitioners for whom I have a great deal of respect. And so today's webinar was born. So I am now going to stop with the backstory about how we all got here and move into just the outline of today's webinar. So the first that we've just done introductions, and today's format will be first talking a little bit about the primary challenges and concerns that were uncovered in the pre-survey question. Victor has done a lot of qualitative data analysis in a very short time to kind of uncover the key patterns that the challenges that folks are struggling with right now. We'll talk a little bit about why Scribble, and you'll hear from Sharon and from Julie, so from English and library faculty. And then Victor is going to give us a very brief demo. It won't be a long, involved demo because we just don't have a lot of time. But then we'll also talk about next steps for those of you who are interested in learning more about this tool. And right now, Scribble is being offered for free, specifically to support all of you right now in these robust challenges. So I'll stop for one moment and just say, Sharon, Julie, or Victor, do you have anything that you want to add to my little origin story?
I'll just say that we say that our company name is Scribble.
Sorry.
our attitude is we don't really care as long as you're saying the name, but we do say Scribble, just to let you know.
Which is much more playful.
Yeah.
I love it. That's great. Thank you. All right. So, and folks are, and to those of you who are just joining us, welcome. Thank you so much. So here we go. So when you registered for this webinar, we asked you what is the primary challenge you're experiencing right now as you teach students the research or the writing process. And Victor has done a little bit of an initial qualitative data analysis. And one thing that speaks to me is that many of you mentioned this abrupt transition to the online environment. 18 of you mentioned that as being a primary challenge. I'm also seeing that the other category, planning, people concerned about plagiarism, people who want to teach specific skills, and also that a great deal of us are concerned around how do we engage our students and how do we help our students, how do we create the kind of learning environment that really fosters motivation. I'm also seeing that student knowledge of information research resources is something that folks are thinking about right now. So I'm wondering, Julie, Victor, or Sharon, what else are you seeing in this initial qualitative data? And folks who are participating, if you want to go ahead and type into the chat, that would also be great.
Hi, everybody. This is Julie Nurse. I'm Library Director at Centralia College. I do see information literacy and source credibility. I did just want to mention, based on the background that Jen just provided, I also attended Innovations at the beginning of March, and based on my friend and colleague Sharon's enthusiasm, after attending the Scribble presentation, the one thing that really jumped out at me and why I contacted Victor afterwards for more information on Scribble was that this research and writing, it's an integrated research and writing platform, but it really could benefit librarians in the work we do with students regarding information literacy instruction. And I can, maybe Victor, we can go back and forth, but there are several aspects to this tool that are really helpful and meaningful. So I see a lot regarding plagiarism, and then again about information literacy and credibility. So I'd like to talk about that sort of thing maybe in a minute.
Absolutely. Thanks, Julie. I really appreciate you adding. So I'm also going to flip to the next slide. And again, Victor has done a really nice qualitative analysis of the data that folks who registered for this webinar talked about. Victor, what in terms of these direct quotes, what strikes you?
Yeah, and actually, I think if you click on it again, there's a couple more quotes that'll pop up there. I think, this is the short form of some of the feedback that we got, right? Things that are very succinct to understand. And I think what I saw both on the last, the data on the last slide, as well as, looking through all the comments and feedback was, there are a variety of different concerns. I think one of the biggest ones now is just this abrupt change to digital, which is obviously why, we've gotten this turnout for this webinar. But in some comments, what I found was that people have some of the same concerns they've always had. So even if we weren't in the middle of this crisis, and even if people weren't faced with having to go digital abruptly, they've always had concerns. Instructors have always had concerns around, using quality sources and using good process. So it's sort of like some things are new and some things are not. And it seems like what's new is just sort of exacerbating some of the concerns that people have always had.
Thank you for pointing that out. And I think for a lot of us, that is a very resonant statement that some of the things that we've known for a long time are exacerbated in COVID-19. We can no longer ignore them. So thank you. Sharon or Julie, anything that you want to add? And folks too who are joining us, if you want to type into the chat any observations you have.
So this is Sharon, and I'm a professor at Centralia College, where I've been for over 20 years. And As I was looking through the comments that people were putting in prior to starting our webinar, I kept seeing myself in all of the comments. There wasn't anything there that I don't worry about as well. There wasn't anything there that I have a perfect answer for, and I'm constantly striving to make better. So one of the things I'm looking forward to through this webinar is a chance to connect with all of you, and perhaps as we move forward out of this group, continuing to help each other navigate a new space in really an abrupt time frame.
Thank you so much. So here's a great quote. This is from an English professor who's also an interim dean right now. And I'll just read it just quickly. One question a colleague asked in a meeting once was how to assess students' research skills without reading every single article they quote or cite to see whether they use the quotation or passage fairly and correctly. Otherwise, we're just guessing at it and grading them on formulating in-text citations and works cited pages. And I think this speaks to something that our English 101 community of practice that we convene a couple times a year has also been very invested in. How do we fairly and equitably assess student learning when it comes to writing and the research process? There's another quote here, sorry, I'll go back real quick. And again, I think this quote, if folks can see it on the screen, this one I think speaks to the complexity of face-to-face and the complexity of nurturing, mentoring, and assisting the student learning process, and how high touch it often is, and the amount of work, the amount of labor engaged for faculty and for students when creating significant and deep learning. Victor, Sharon, or Julie, anything else that you want to add to this statement? Any comments or thoughts? And I'll move on to the next. This one's from an assistant professor of English. I've always found that the research process requires individualized feedback, and I'm looking for ways to keep this process intuitive and organized. Lovely tension there, both intuitive yet organized. And this is from one of our instructors, one of our beta instructors. And many of our students have technology challenges to begin with, so being unable to hold their hands, so to speak, as they venture into the research process seems really daunting, both for us and for them. And here's one more just around how Canvas might be a little bit clunky, going through multiple steps to retrieve information about students' assignments. And with that, I am going to now turn it over to Sharon first. And Sharon, I'm wondering if you could just, as we discussed, just share a little bit about what problems of practice has Scribble helped you address?
So thanks, Jen. I first saw Scribble, as we've mentioned before, at the Innovations Conference in March, and it was before we all realized that we were going to be teaching remotely. And the things that got me excited then are still the things that I think are useful now. It's always been kind of a wrestling match for me to try and get students to bring their sources to places where we can see them and look at them, to understand how they're moving through their sources, to have a way to give them feedback that isn't horrifyingly clunky. You know, students come in with piles of paper and flash drives, or they're sending something in online. And one of the things that first appealed to me about Scribble was that students have a library and they put everything in the library, and then they can share that library with me and with other members of the class, which means everything is in the right place all the time. I can see how much they have. I can see how much they don't have. Scribble also does a really nice job of helping folks to identify the differences between their sources, which got me very excited. There are pie charts with color for students who are really keyed into visual images rather than the text-heavy teaching that we often do online. I thought that was really helpful because they can see that just because everything came through their computer screen, it isn't all the same thing, that a database is different than a book, is different than a Wikipedia article, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought it did a really nice job of sort of streamlining that process for them. It also got me really excited when I saw that I could track their progress. I can set up an assignment inside Canvas because it goes into Canvas, hallelujah. So students are in one place. And then I can set up an assignment so I can see what their progress is. I can see how much they've written or what sort of sources they've accumulated or what sort of commentary they've placed on their sources or how they've tagged sources to try and put things together. I can see everything in process in a way that I simply don't have access to in a face-to-face class. And I think it does it in a way that makes it easier for students to manage all the pieces and the parts, because that's always a big concern for me. Students have a giant folder, or they have a box, or they have a pile of things, and they start to lose track of what they're doing. So this gives a really intuitive way for students to sort of organize all of that. The other piece that I found really helpful is that it helps with taking information from primary sources and putting them into a document. It helps to organize those things. It allows students not have to repeatedly type things over and over again or forget where they got something. So it streamlines those pieces of the process, which means I can see what they need and I can address that in ways that I couldn't before. So I can take a look and see if somebody is way behind. I'm not asking them that in a class full of other people. Again, because I'm working remotely, I can interact with them specifically. I can set up a Zoom tutorial with them. I can send a private Canvas message. We can both go into their Scribble library and we can walk through what's happening there. It just gives me a handful of options that I can tailor for individual students or for groups of students. The other thing that got me really excited is it means that students who are way ahead, those students who will turn in the most beautiful thing you've ever seen because they are detail people and they love research, it gives me a chance to see where they are as well and give them the same kind of attention that I'm giving to all the other students. And I'm going to be quiet now for a minute.
Sharon, that was great. Thank you so much. And folks who are listening, if you have questions as we go along, please type them into the chat, and we'll either have time for Q&A at the end, or I'll have one of our presenters answer them in the moment. Julie, as a librarian, what do you see as sort of the needs or problems of practice that Scribble addresses?
One of the main things that jumped out at me initially was, one of our challenges is
And sorry, everyone. Julie is presenting today from home, of course, and I think she lives in a remote area. So, Julie, I'm so sorry. You just cut out. Do you?
Oh dear.
Could you? Sorry to say this. Could you start over?
Yes. Yeah. Please let me know. I'm in a remote area. Can you hear me now?
We can. And just one thing for those of you who are asking for a screenshot, we are going to have a demo of Scribble. So we wanted to start though by hearing faculty and librarian voices about what they find appealing, and then we will be giving you an example of what this looks like. So thank you for that comment. Julie, go ahead.
Okay, I'll try again. I hope you can hear me. I was just saying one of our challenges is we teach one-shots. So we have as librarians, we have limited access to our students. We might meet with them one time in a classroom setting. And so in that limited access, what Scribble provides is a central space for librarians and instructors to collaborate with students as they curate, annotate, cite, organize, and write through that whole research process. So it really benefits us as librarians just in terms of giving us that access to the students. I also see it, I see our writing center having a place in this whole process as well, using Scribble. And checking in real quick, can you hear me?
Yes, you're doing
Okay,
great. Thank you.
okay. Also, a large percentage of our students are really not adequately prepared for college level research and writing by the time we see them. So again, it's meaningful for us to have more time and access with the students, and through Scribble, the student is able to scaffold and organize their work, you know, with outline and bibliography editors. And so we can check, as Sharon mentioned, we can track their progress, and then we can also do virtual check-ins with them. And one other thing that I was very excited about, and I hope, Victor, that you can talk about this a little bit, but Scribble provides database tracking and usage. So we can actually see how, you know, what databases the students are using. We can guide them and provide feedback that way as well. And as Sharon mentioned, you also have the ability to create a library, individual libraries of resources, whether it be books, articles, and so forth. So those are just some of the things that really, that I wanted to highlight.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Julie. And now, Victor, would you be willing to show us the tool?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Let me just
Yay!
switch over and share my screen.
And while you're switching over, I think I made you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Yeah, I think it'll work.
Okay. And just while we're transitioning over, I will say to those of you, normally we would have done a webinar practice, we would have done a little bit more of a run through, but given the pace of things, we just haven't had a lot of time to prep this. So thanks for everyone's patience.
Absolutely. So do you see my screen now? It says teaching, research, and writing during the pandemic in the middle of the slide.
Perfect, we do.
Great. And you know, if you have any trouble hearing me or following me, then if someone can interrupt and let me know, that'd be great. So I'm gonna basically, you know, do what has been said here, which is show you, you know, how the thing works, which I think is really what a lot of people here want to see in order to kind of translate what we've talked about into visuals. Before I do want to just make one comment to tag on to what Julie was just talking about. You know, if you go back to that first slide that Jen showed, information literacy, incredible sources, that was an interesting, you know, aspect of a library angle on the current problem that we're all facing. There was another thing on that slide that talked about, you know, a lot of you being concerned about students not necessarily knowing what resources were available. And so those of you that have that concern, I am very interested in hearing whether or not you think we could actually build something into the product that would help students basically see what resources are available in your library. We'd be willing to sort of take that on as a project down the road if that's of interest, because I see that if you're doing work in a certain platform, if that platform can sort of make available to you or suggest to you what resources are available through your institution, that might be kind of an interesting way to give those resources more visibility than they might otherwise have. So just a little interesting thought that I had based on looking at all of your feedback and that in particular. But let me jump right in here. And what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of background in terms of, you know, where we come from, why we care about what we're doing. And then I'm going to do exactly what I think Amy had asked for, which is show you some screenshots of the product. And as Jen mentioned, it's an overview, right? We only have an hour together, and so this is not going to be comprehensive, but we'd be happy to, you know, schedule something deeper later if folks want to dive a little bit deeper. So here's the, you know, the problem that we've been addressing, which is that, as many of you know, because you live and breathe it every day, there's a massive kind of research and writing skills crisis that's sort of always been there. And it's been there, frankly, before this COVID crisis hit. As a chief had surveyed instructors in colleges some years ago, they found that many of you, frankly, were not very satisfied with how well, you know, high school students were prepared in these areas of research and writing when they came to you. And unfortunately, it continues on after they leave you and when they go into the workplace. You can see here that about a quarter of the students that come out of college, have deficient writing skills and so forth. And then there's a sort of eye-popping number from the National Commission on Writing on the amount of productivity lost every year due to bad writing in the business world. So it is a very pervasive problem that we actually started tackling first in the K-12 environment, where we've been working for quite some time. And we are now sort of obviously in a big way bringing that into hopefully your world. And when you think about the problem, I think many of you, frankly, have just sort of told us specifically what your specific challenges and concerns are. And that's what we tried to aggregate and put together that Jen was covering. From our view, in the work that we've done at Scribble, we tried to dissect the workflow and really try to understand, from a workflow perspective, why is research and writing so difficult? Why has it always been so difficult? And then, of course, why is it particularly difficult right now? And as I think many of you know, part of the problem is that it is a very complex process that requires lots of different steps and different skills associated with those steps, right? So students that are going through the research and writing process have to do many of the things that you see here on the left-hand side. And I'll just do a quick check with Jen to make sure that my slides are coming through. Do you see a puzzle pieces slide on the left-hand side?
We do.
Okay, good. I like to check in every now and then, given Wi-Fi concerns. So, these are the kinds of things that you have to do as you're going through the process as a student. And the problem, or one of the problems, has been that historically, educators and students have had to kind of historically cobble together a bunch of different tools to do different parts of the workflow. So you might have used a standalone citation tool, a standalone PDF organizer, a web clipper thing to grab things off the internet when you're doing research on the web. You're pulling things off the open web, you're pulling things in from databases like Julie had mentioned, and then inevitably you're writing in Google Docs or Microsoft Word, depending on what you're used to and what you prefer. And so it is a kind of a hot mess of different apps and workflows. And in many places, we see people are still using physical note cards or printing articles out, as I think Sharon had mentioned. And sometimes they're keeping that at home. Sometimes they're bringing that, to you when you're able to meet in person. And so it is sort of not necessarily easy to stay organized. And from an educator standpoint, it's always been a hard thing to teach and track this process because the student work and the data is trapped in all these different silos. And so our goal has been to really try to build a solution that brings all this together under one roof. And so we help students curate, annotate, cite, build an outline, build a bibliography, and then we integrate with Google Docs and Microsoft Word, and we have a bunch of other integrations as well. But it really kind of helps the students stay organized and scaffolded through the workflow. And then, for you all, we have basically got a bunch of capabilities that really help you in terms of, maintaining classes and assignments. But I think the highlight of that workflow is really, the analytics dashboard that lets you see some analytics in real time for an assignment as it's being worked on by the student. And that, we've been told, is really novel. I think you heard Sharon talk a little bit about being able to see data, in visual form and graphs and whatnot. And we've often talked to educators that have sort of said, wow, this is interesting because I never really get to see this, and certainly not in real time. And so our view is that can really sort of help change how you potentially interact with the students, because now you've got data that normally either you didn't have, or that if you try to stay on top of it, it might have just been frankly very laborious for you to try to collect and stay on top of all that data. So at the end of the day, it's the first real sort of fully integrated research and writing solution. And our goal has been really to try to provide something that saves time for students and for yourselves. And ultimately, the data that comes out of that analytics dashboard for an assignment is meant to help you help personalize the instruction in a way that historically just either wasn't possible or wasn't easy because the data wasn't available. And I do remember that when I went through all of your comments, there were a few people that said, we really try to provide, you really try to provide personalized feedback. And the way the work's historically been managed, that's really difficult. And we're trying to make that a lot easier. And I think the analytics help make that possible. So that's the overview. Let me actually switch over to, I guess we've already talked about some of this. Let me switch over to the screenshots, which is I think what many of you are waiting for, to be able to sort of see what this thing actually looks like and how it works. So we're going to first look at this from the student perspective. So what I have here is a couple slides that show what it's like from the student perspective, and then I'll switch over to what you'd be seeing, including the analytics dashboard that I just mentioned. So let's say I'm a student writing a paper about space exploration, just as an example. And I'm out there on the web doing research, and I come across an article that looks interesting, like the one that you see here. I can click on the Scribble Chrome extension, when I do that, two things happen. First, the article gets saved to my Scribble library in the cloud with one click, where it lives forever, even if the original goes offline. And that solves or addresses one of the classic problems in web-based research known as link rot, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. Basic idea being that we've historically bookmarked articles in the browser, then you come back a couple of weeks or a couple of months later and you have a bunch of broken links, and now you've got to kind of retrace your steps to find that information again. So we save a copy of the article, and so that is always there for reference. The second thing that happens when you click on the Chrome extension is that we actually load this toolbar on top of the page, which allows a student to then richly annotate the article right in the browser. So they can literally highlight passages they might want to quote. They can add comments in this comment sidebar that you see here to kind of capture their thoughts about the content that they're reading. So that really aids with close reading of this information sources that they're looking at. And you'll notice that there's a reply option at the bottom of each comment. And that's because if this is a shared article with one or more individuals, multiple people can actually look at the article and reply to one another. And that can be done asynchronously, or that can be done synchronously. And the reason for that is that a couple of years ago, we rebuilt our entire annotation system to work real-time concurrent collaborative, the way that people are used to seeing today with real-time concurrent editing in Google Docs or with Office 365 Word. And so you can actually have multiple people looking at the same article at the same time. We've built presence awareness into the application, so you can see who else is in the article at the same time as you. And they could highlight something or reply, and you'd see their changes, and vice versa. So it really kind of brings this whole process into the modern era by making these things capable, making these things available in the cloud in a way that you've seen in word processing, but you haven't historically seen in annotation of third-party content. The other thing we do is we automatically extract citation information from the article, and we pre-fill a bunch of the fields that you need for properly formatted citation in these citation fields down below in our citation sidebar. And what you're seeing here is that we've filled in as much as we can. Like every citation tool that's ever been built, we're not 100% perfect. So we always tell folks to double check the work and make sure that fields are filled in properly and you've got what you need. If we've missed anything, we put a red border around it so that the student knows it's missing information they might need to fill in. And whatever work they're doing, if they're editing any of the citation fields down here, the nice thing is that they'll see the impact of their work in real time, because they'll see the citation up top change in real time as they're typing in the fields down below. You'll see here in the screenshot that this shows the APA style. We usually default to MLA, but really we support all the different citation styles out there. Now, all the work the student's doing is actually getting auto-saved. So if they're highlighting, adding comments, editing citation fields, it's all getting auto-saved to their library in the cloud, which we've talked about before. I think Sharon and Julie mentioned that as well. And the way that you get to that library to be able to look at your sources and do some additional work is either by going to our site and logging in with your credentials, or you could actually click on this library button in the toolbar, and it'll open up a new browser tab and bring you right into that library. And I see there's a question that came up. Maybe I'll just pause for a second. So there's a question here that says that the webinar email stated that Scribble will be free until July 1st. When I try to sign up, it says 14-day trial, blah, blah, blah. Yes. So I'll cover that at the end, but Eva, the really short answer is there's just a link on our blog that you need to submit some information, and we'll send you a code that'll let you extend the trial that's normally 14 days till July 1st. I was going to talk about it at the end, but in case anybody else is confused about that, I want to let you know that that is true. So just going back to the demo here, this is the library that Sharon and Julie had mentioned earlier. It's basically a place where research is saved, but it's also a place where work can be done. So what you see here is that, for example, the article we were looking at, which was a web page, is saved. But I want to be very clear that we're not just about sort of curating web pages using the Chrome extension. You can actually save bookmarks in there. You can actually bring in PDFs if you like. If you happen to be on a device like a Mac or a PC, so typically not a Chromebook, you may even have files saved on your hard drive. You can literally drag and drop Word docs, PowerPoints, PDFs from your desktop directly into your library. We'll upload it to your account, apply a system tag that you see here so that you know that that article came from your desktop, and then that lives alongside all the other articles and resources that you've saved in your library. I should also mention that on the last slide, I showed you an example of how you can use the Chrome extension to grab a web page, but you can actually also use the Chrome extension to bring a PDF into Scribble directly from the web or from a database. And the reason for that is that we've built our own cloud-based PDF viewer and annotator. And so the way that it would work is, let's say on that last slide, the article we were looking at was a PDF instead of a web page. You click on that Chrome extension, And what would happen is that we would bring that PDF from, let's say, the browser directly into our PDF viewer. We would save it to a library, and it would be ready to annotate all with one click. So it's kind of a seamless curation of PDFs, for example, from databases or from the open web directly into your library, and they're ready to annotate right away. You can see here that there are tags being applied to different articles to help you kind of organize things. That's how students can organize the research that they've done. The tags can actually be applied both at the article level as well as the individual annotation level, which is not something I typically show, but just FYI. That's there so that you can both organize your articles as well as your individual quotes and individual facts and figures. If you're somebody who doesn't like to proactively organize very much, you can be a little bit lazy in our system because we actually allow you to full text search all the content in the library. So you can do a simple keyword search. In this example, maybe a search would be like Mars or Elon Musk. And we'll go and search the full text of every article that you've added to the library and just show you those articles that have that search term. So it's a very familiar user experience that mimics what you are used to doing in a Google search or even a Gmail search, for example. And then this particular example shows that we've got one library here for this particular paper project. If we were in the actual app instead of this PowerPoint overview, I would click on this little library tab that you see here on the left-hand side, and you'd see a list slide out of all the different libraries that I have access to. So you could have one for your English paper, another for your history project, and another for your science fair paper or your science fair project if let's say you're in K-12. That's the example I usually use. But you can have different libraries for different projects and papers. Every library has its own set of tags, so they are not cross-polluting ontologies across different collaborators and projects. Every library has an owner. That owner could be a student or it could be an instructor. And you can invite other people to that library to make it collaborative. So it's really good for group projects that way and papers. And if you're an instructor that has a library and you invite the whole class, that converts it into what we call a class library that you could then use to throw a bunch of articles in there to help students jumpstart the research process because they all have access to it and they could use those initial articles you've curated for them as a starting off point for research. It can also be a great way to distribute a quick reading list where you're curating articles into that library in real time and students all have access to that library from within that library list on the left-hand side of their account. The last thing I'll say here is what you're looking at here is really your sources tab within your library, but we have some other tabs as well. And I think, if I remember correctly, maybe it was Sharon who mentioned, or maybe it was Julie, that we have a bibliography editor and an outline editor. Those are easily accessible within the library just by clicking on these tabs. And in the bibliography editor, we make it really easy with a couple of clicks to generate a bibliography in the right style and format. And the reason for that is, again, going back to that puzzle pieces slide, we help you curate, annotate, and cite the information early on. And so later when you're downstream and need to create your bibliography, that information resides in the system and we can make it easy with a couple clicks to generate a bibliography. Similarly with the outline, we have a way of basically in the outline editor allowing you to drag and drop your notes and highlights into the outline interface where it auto numbers everything. It remembers what needs to be indented, or you can make changes if you like. You can drag and drop the bullet points around. So it does what you'd expect an outline editor to do. But what I think is particularly interesting and we've been told is useful is that whenever you bring, let's say, your annotations or your quotes that you've annotated into the outline, we automatically update your bibliography in the background. And again, we're able to do that because we know where that information came from since we help you curate it, annotate it, and cite it, on the last slide, for example. So there's a lot you can do in the library, and I don't want to overwhelm folks, but there's the main point here is that we bring everything together in one place. And then when you're later then reviewing students' work, that's really powerful because you don't have to go to 3 or 4 different apps or different places to try to find this information to assess and provide feedback. Lastly, on the student side, I'm going to show an example of something that I'm sure many of you have heard of in concept, which is the concept of a Google Docs add-on. Now, we do this for Google Docs, but we also do it for Microsoft Word. I'm just going to show one example because it's literally the same thing in Word as it is in Google Docs. But for those of you that are not familiar, we integrate with word processors like Google Docs and Microsoft Word through what Google calls an add-on and what Microsoft calls is an add-in. And in both cases, what the companies have done is basically given us a sidebar, so a little bit of real estate within the word processor interface. So that's what you're seeing here. It's our add-on within Google Docs. So this is normally the Google Doc you'd be writing in as a student, and this is our add-on, which is a sidebar that appears alongside that paper. And our add-on is called Scribble Writer. And what you're seeing in the sources tab in this add-on, which the student can call up when they need it, is basically we've taken that library that I showed you on the last slide and we've slimmed it down and we've embedded it right here within Google Docs so that students have easy access to their research right here while they're writing their paper here on the left. So for example, let's say I call up the add-on and I see my library of articles. I can hover over those. And as I hover over the different articles, I might remember, you know, when I did this research 2 weeks ago, I remember that this was an interesting article. I don't remember what I did in it. Let me go one level deeper by clicking on this little right arrow. And when I do that, it'll basically go one level deeper, and it'll show me all the notes and highlights that I made in that article. And if I hover over one of those highlights I made, I may remember that this is something I wanted to quote in my paper. So I can click on the plus button here, and we'll go and grab that green highlighted text out of the article in that library and drop it into the paper, put it in quotes, and insert an in-text parenthetical citation at the end. Similarly, let's say instead of browsing through my library, again, I did the research 2 weeks ago. I can't remember where it was, but there's a specific quote related to Mars that I wanted to put in. Well, I can type in Mars here and basically full text search my entire library for all of my notes and highlights where the search term Mars appears in any of them. So you can see here that once I click search, we went and found all those notes and highlights and show you the search results right here. So you see here that the search term Mars is bolded here, 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 and so forth. And again, I can hover over one of those and insert that as a quote into the paper. Now, from a student's perspective, that streamlines that workflow of bringing your evidence into the paper. From your perspective as an instructor, if you are reading, 100 papers, and as many of you mentioned, you have concerns about validating evidence or making sure students are using credible sources. If you try to do that the way that historically you may have, it's some work to go and find that information. The nice thing here is that we actually make these in-text parenthetical citations links, which when you click on them, will actually take you back to the student's library, open up that article, and show you where in that article that particular evidence was taken from, or that quote appears in that article. So it becomes really just a click away to be able to validate that evidence. That's a sources tab. We also have an outline tab here. I didn't show you the editor for the outline interface on the last slide, but I described it to you briefly. And so the idea here is that, if you've already done your research and then you're creating your outline, and then maybe in week 3, you're coming in to write the paper, as a student, you can basically call up the add-on, go to the outline tab, click insert here, and it'll insert the whole outline into the paper to help jumpstart the writing process. And then lastly, we've got the bibliography tab here. And what this does is it basically shows you the bibliography that we've been kind of automatically been updating and keeping on behalf of the student, which then gets updated and added on the last page of the document. And that's where it sort of gets maintained. And I know we're in the weeds here, but I think a lot of you can appreciate that because I read your feedback. I guess this is where I usually mention that our philosophy is that we're in the weeds because that's where we know a lot of the pain and the time suck is. And I guess we believe that we live in a time now where software can help automate a lot of the mundane stuff that we all had to suffer through. So what we're really trying to do is shift students' time away from manual information processing so they can spend more of that time on the critical thinking aspects of the process, like thinking about the quality of the sources, the structure of the paper, the validity of the evidence, and that kind of thing. And so most instructors and librarians that we talk to sort of agree that that's a better use of time, and that's really what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to skip the Microsoft version of this, but it's basically the same thing. You can see here, there's a sidebar within Microsoft Word. Just know that if your students are writing in Word, or if you're writing in Word, that's something you can take advantage of. Let me switch gears here. I know that we're running short on time, so I want to just make sure that I point out some of the things that I think Sharon really appreciated about the analytics. So we're going to switch gears and take an example now of, I'm a instructor maybe in the humanities, and I've assigned a research paper. And I'm now looking at the analytics dashboard that I mentioned earlier for that particular assignment. What you're able to see here is, as the instructor, I'm able to see how many students are on target and off target for the different steps in the workflow or the different steps in the process, right? So I can see how many students have started the research or not, started the paper or not, or met certain goals that I created when I created the assignment. And so really at a glance, I can get a lay of the land, and I can see who's progressing fine, and maybe more importantly, who's kind of stuck early in the process. So if it's 3 days before the paper is due, and I know that these are the 5 students that haven't even started the research yet, now I know where to focus my time and energy. We also have the data at the individual student level. So we can show you, for example, that Jordan here has collected 6 articles. She's on her way to, she's met the first goal of having 5 cited sources in the paper. She's on her way to meeting the second goal of having 1,000 words in the paper. Susan here is a rock star. She's all in the green and she's already turned it in. Kara here has a lot of work left to do. All information that would be good to know in real time and as soon as possible so that you can help them course correct in case they're getting off track. And I think our philosophy, and I think this has been validated now by, talking to and working with lots of educators, is that the timeliness of that data and that input to you is really important. Because, if you find out late in the game that Kara got stuck, or, somebody hasn't really kept up, there isn't usually time in the term to help people catch up or to kind of do a redo. So our goal is really to try to provide you access to the student work plus the data around that work in real time, so that you can help pinpoint who those folks are and help them get unstuck or help them move along before it gets too late in the game to get caught up or to course correct. The other thing I'll mention is that this last column is a little bit different. It actually gets slightly into that information literacy space. We don't go super deep yet, but we have plans to do more in the future. What this shows is that we are able to automatically bucket the information that students are saving into some major categories. So if we were in the actual app instead of this PowerPoint overview, and I hovered over these different pie slices, you see that two of these articles are coming from government websites, one's a Wikipedia article, two are coming from academic websites, and so forth. And so you get a very high level understanding of roughly where is this information coming from. And we're trying to give librarians and teachers, and educators access to a rough understanding of the credibility and diversity of sources students are using. Now, what's not shown on this version of this slide is that we've actually updated this now, where we can show you not just the diversity of online sources the information is coming from, but since we are actually compatible with a lot of the databases that are out there, like JSTOR and EBSCO and Gale and whatnot, we're actually able to show you not just whether the information has come from different online sources, but also whether the sources have come from databases and which databases in particular. I think that's something that Julie had wanted me to speak to specifically, so I wanted to make sure that you saw that. The last thing I'll say about this is that, we show you the data. That's what this is. What's not shown on this slide, but is shown on the next slide, is that we actually give you access to the underlying work itself, and that's one of the things that Sharon had pointed out. The reason for that is that when you create an assignment within Scribble for your students, we spawn what's called an assignment library for every student for that assignment. And you as the instructor actually have access to that assignment library from the get-go, from the beginning all the way until the end when that assignment is handed in. Now, if you wanted to be able to look at a particular student's progress, in the new version that we just updated not too long ago, you click on the student's name in the analytics dashboard, and it would basically take you to their particular assignment review page. So what you're now looking at is that this is kind of a summary page where you can review Jordan's work. So you'll notice here that we've kind of put in a simplified version of her library. So you have a very easy access to all the different tabs that you can flip through to kind of review her paper, her outline, her sources, etc. You can then provide overall feedback in one field right here. So the feedback field's up top, her work is down below. It's all nice in one place. And then if you don't happen to like this particular view, we have some other options where you can maximize the view of the document so that you can kind of get a full screen view. You can pop out the document, for example, into its own tab. Or if you wanted to, you can actually click on this little link that says View in Student Library. And we then take you into the student's library, and it looks exactly the way that they see it, but we put an orange border around it so that you know that you're in review mode. So you can look at it in the same way that they're seeing it, and you can use the same language that they might be used to using to describe navigating through the system and where they need to do certain work. Lastly, you'll see that I don't have it expanded here, but there's an option to expand a student list on the left-hand side that would let you quickly flip through all the different students that are assigned this assignment. And every time you click on a new name, this whole page would refresh, and you'd be seeing Jordan, and then you'd be seeing Kyle and Bob and whoever it is. So a very easy way to quickly flip through everybody's work, both by going through the student list and then flipping through their tabs for a particular assignment. All right, I think we're near the end here, so I want to just mention that we are integrated with Google and Microsoft in a bunch of different ways. You've seen some of it. There's other things here that we can talk about if you're interested, but I just wanted to let you know that we're deeply sort of integrated into both ecosystems. We're also integrated into a variety of other systems. I think for most of the folks on this call, the one that's going to be most interesting and relevant is Canvas. So I'm happy to speak about that in more detail, but we do single sign-on, and there's a way to actually embed your Scribble library within the Canvas interface, which can be really handy for convenience. And I'm not going to have time to talk about this because I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time for discussion and answering questions at the end. But I will say that based on feedback we've gotten from educators, we've added some new assistive features. So the ability to have both text and annotations read aloud to you. and then the ability to select phrases and words in a text and have them translated and defined for you. These are not new concepts in the world. I'm sure you've seen other systems where these kinds of things live. But what's really unique is that because we get to combine them with annotation and the stuff that we've already built that you've seen, we get to enable some new experiences that you probably haven't seen before. So I won't go into detail here, but if anybody has questions, or maybe we can do a future webinar where I demo those things, I'm happy to talk about those things with you. And then let me just end.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to end with this, which is the question that came up earlier, which is how do you take advantage of what we have to offer immediately, since I know many of you are trying to struggle or are struggling with the abrupt move to online. If you go to our website, scribble.com, the top blog post that we have right now, which you can get to by clicking on blog here, is how we help support remote teaching and mitigate the disruption that we're all experiencing now due to the shutdowns. The gist of it is you should read it because it explains it in detail, but I think from this webinar, you probably sort of intuitively understand that we bring the whole process online and allow you to provide feedback remotely. But we're basically making our paid version free until July 1st. And within that blog post is a link that you can click to request free access until July 1st. Also, I don't think I put it on here, but my email address is victor@scribble.com. So if you have any questions, you can just send me an email. And I will stop there because I think Jen was going to say that we need to go to comments or Q&A. But that's basically all I've got to say. And I want to make sure that everybody saw that this is available as an immediate resource to help you with the immediate crunch that you're all facing this term.
And we can also send this link as follow-up with the recording. So Victor, I think if I could just summarize for you what's been happening in the chat, I think there's a number of different questions around cost, which I think which might be, an easy follow-up in online, just online. But
Sure.
I think there's a couple of questions that I think it would be nice to have you speak to.
Sure.
So Bridget Nowlin has a question around how does this work with, or does this work with physical books, interviews, and other non-online resources?
It's a good question. We have an option where you can, there's an option to add a source that would be a book or a print source. And when you do that, let's say it's a book, you can start typing the name of the title of a book, its author, or an ISBN, and we use an API to basically recommend which book we think you might mean. When you click on that, we basically suck in the citation information and create an entry in your library for that book. Now, we're not saving the whole book, we're not saving the whole print source, that would be a waste of space. But within that entry we made in your library, you then have the ability to type in a quote, for example, to capture something from that physical offline resource that you want to then use later in your paper. So there is a way of emulating offline sources in our system that lives alongside the PDFs and web pages and all that.
Victor, thank you so much. And obviously too, folks, Victor is absolutely available, I'm sure, for one-to-one conversations as well, if you want a deeper
Yes.
answer. There's a question from Denise. Feedback from student users from K-12 and college level. What kind of feedback do you collect?
We get emails, pretty frequently. We also hear back from instructors who tell us, and teachers in K-12 who tell us about what the experience is like. And I'd say overall, the feedback we get is, that it feels modern compared to a lot of things I guess students have used in the past. It feels intuitive, like a modern web application that they'd want to use. And in many instances, we've heard anecdotally, I should say, that students that are in K-12, have continued using the product when they go off to college. That's actually something not that I mentioned specifically because you all are not in K-12, but we do make it easy for students in K-12 to essentially take their account and their data with them when they come to you in college. So there's meant to be a sort of a transition that's easy from, earlier in your academic career to later. But bottom line is, we can share testimonials and things like that if people are interested. We do have some on our website. At the bottom, there's a scrolling set of testimonials and quotes. I think there's a specific set of ones from students if you go to the student specific part of our website.
Thank you so much. There's
Sure.
a very important question from Davis Oldham in the chat as well, that this looks like a fantastic tool. And he's curious, what do you do with student data and student intellectual property, their writing and their research?
Yeah, I know where that question's coming from. I think people sometimes are concerned given what they've seen a particular plagiarism product do with terms of service. So we don't claim ownership rights over the work that you do. your work and your data is yours. We've never shown ads. We've never sold student data. We updated our terms of service and our privacy policy last summer to be, frankly, more updated and more in line with a lot of the student data privacy stuff that's been going around the country for the last year or two, particularly in K-12. And working in K-12, we're actually held to a pretty high standard because that is something that's of high concern there. So hopefully that's enough, but you can certainly check out our terms of service and our privacy policy, or contact us if you have any questions or concerns about that.
Thank you. And there is, Clint Hull has a follow-up question about the student feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so the question was not so much about whether you have testimonials
Mm.
as how you are gathering data objectively with random sampling to ensure that the product works as best as it can.
So we haven't done a sort of formal study on usability, if that's part of what you're getting at. That's something we'd love to do. In terms of feedback we get, it comes in different forms, sometimes by email. We've actually embedded a number of places in the system where people can give us feedback. So if you run into a bug or a problem annotating a particular article, we tend to be very responsive to that feedback. We try to act on it very quickly, and we've been complimented on that response time. But we also get feedback from people that say, hey, can you make some changes to the platform? Both from students and instructors, and we try very hard to be very responsive, and we've been complimented on that. If I'm not getting the gist of your question, I apologize, and I'm happy to take it up with you later. But hopefully that helps.
No, I think that's great. And again, I think I've found you to be very receptive to all questions and very attentive. So one thing that I wanted to ask, are that there's a lot of questions around cost
Sure.
after
I'm happy to
July
answer that.
1st. Yeah, so go ahead and maybe talk about funding models.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it's a freemium service. So there is a free version that you can use, and a lot of people do. It doesn't contain the assignments and analytics. And if you go to our site, there's a plans tab in the top right-hand corner, and it generally gives you a sense of what's free versus paid. If you're not using the free version, the paid version for an individual student to use, let's say on their own, is $35 for an annual subscription, which we've been told is fairly reasonable compared to what students pay for textbooks and whatnot. That is a model that we've had out for quite some time. I think it's already enabled now, but we are actually, I don't know if it's actually on the plans page yet, but when you go into your account under settings, there should be an option to see something new that we have launched, which is that we've created a semester option that can be used by instructors with their students that will be $20 for a semester. The idea there being that if you want to use the paid version of the product with your students for your course for a particular semester, and we're actually going to be introducing a quarter option as well. But the idea is that for a semester, it's $20, and the price we've been talking about tentatively for a quarter, I think, is $12. So I might be off by $1 or $2 on that amount, but we've been told, for what it does, those price points are reasonable and competitive with other things that people are asked to buy on a semester or quarter basis. And the idea is that if you want to be able to use this with all of your students on a sort of per instructor or per course level, yourself as well as all of your students would have to be in the paid version of the product, which again would be $35 for a year, $20 for a semester, or I think it's $12 for a quarter. So that's the pricing we have now. We'd love to hear your feedback if you feel like it's reasonable or not. The feedback we've gotten so far has been pretty encouraging. And then there's a related question I saw about not an individual instructor using with their course, but an institution. So if an institution wanted to do a site license, that would be based on an individual quote that we usually provide based on how large the institution is, whether it's a department or a particular school or the whole campus. But just to give you some ballpark so that you have some number in your head that you can benchmark to, it would be in the neighborhood of basically $4 to $6 or $8. We're kind of trying to figure out the range, but let's just call it $4 to $8. And I'd say most folks would probably peg it around $5 per student based on the enrollment size of the school, or just based on the enrollment size of the school or the division. If you have any feedback, put it into the chat. We are kind of ironing out that and honing it down. But if you had to use a kind of rule of thumb, I'd call it $5 a student for the enrollment size that you have.
Great. And just one final question,
Sure.
just clarifying. So do faculty pay the same amount as students in their class?
Yes, we try to keep it simple. We thought about doing it other ways, but we were told that it's not an outrageous price. So if a faculty member is in the paid version, it's the same price as the student. So everybody's got the same numbers in their head.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I hate to end this so abruptly, but I have, like many of us, I have back-to-back meetings today. Otherwise, I would want to have a more discussion, more hangout. So I'm going to say that we're going to wrap this up, but we will be in touch with more information. Definitely one thing that folks have said is that they would like more Scribble specific webinars. And so we'll be in touch with how to sign up, a link to the pricing, and a couple other, maybe answers to questions. But we can definitely have more conversations like this. And I did want to say too to everyone, again, I know that your time is really valuable, and thank you for making this time, and especially to Victor, Sharon, and Julie. You guys have just worked really hard on this, and thank you so much.